On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Ashley Wines. She is the Director of Talent Strategy and Operations at Carta. We're going to be talking about talent's influence, and we're going to talk about getting into the room earlier, being proactive versus reactive. And we're going to talk about handling these multiple stakeholders, and a lot of times in these matrix organizations, and a lot of times, if you're in talent, you have to jump in and build trust really quick and deliver. So we're going to talk to Ashley about a bunch of different things. Hopefully we'll have enough ground to cover them all, but I do appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Happy to.
Okay. All right. So talent's influence. I like this one because I think a lot of times when we think about talent, there's various different views of it. In this case, we want to talk about that influence. And when we first started talking about this, we started talking about when we enter the conversation, right? I guess in your world and different processes, different timelines, when does talent get involved? At what point are you guys tasked to jump in the process of hiring?
I think it varies at different organizations, but in an ideal workflow, it's early. It's in your initial headcount planning. It's in org design. Because ultimately, recruiting has a lot of knowledge about what's actually happening on the ground floor. We're usually hearing from managers where there might be a potential attrition or how they might be thinking about restructuring an organization, even new product ideas. And so when headcount planning happens without some of this insight, it always devolves by the time recruiting gets back in, adds it in. We have to reforecast from the top down all over again. So in an ideal setting, we're actually really involved in the org planning part of it, in that capacity planning from an organizational perspective up front.
Do you see an opportunity to actually get into that room earlier? Are there opportunities, obviously from the org planning, I understand some decisions have been made. We need to get involved. Is there an opportunity to even be earlier?
Tell me more about that.
So I guess what I'm maybe asking is, so there are, within engineering company, there's product roadmaps, there's various other sales activities, there's things happening that might anticipatorily generate some demand, right? So we know that when it's a little bit more firmed up, when there's actually a hiring decision. But if, let's say, we knew the 2-year roadmap and we were aware of that, and we started planning out our talent roadmap, which is obviously very flexible and fluid, would that change anything for us? Would that give us any more information? Obviously, because the window we're talking about is a lot of decisions have been made versus seeing a little bit further into that crystal ball.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the context there. When I say getting into the org design side of that, I do think it actually is more at that early stage. So if we're thinking about building a product, I think thinking about the talent involved and necessary for that should be part of the conversation. Our leaders should understand that searching for that 0 to 1 engineering talent is going to maybe look different than our skilled engineering talent that we've built the pipeline for. So what is that going to take in terms of the timeline to build that up? How are we going to strategically pivot if this product works or doesn't work? Are we going to need to scale it up, or are we going to need to cut it? And where do we redirect our resources? So to your point, absolutely. If we're starting to think about something strategic, whether that's a new product, whether we're entering into a new geo, the talent part of that is really important to be part of the considerations. And our talent team has expertise in thinking about building out strategies, doing research on the market and availability of talent that can be really influential in approaching that with the right data and approach up front versus running down that runway too far and then having to back up and do that in the middle.
Yeah, and in your role particularly, all right, you have your title is talent strategy, and I know there are product teams within engineering companies, right? That's a very well-defined function. I think a lot of times talent people take on internally facing talent product roles, even though we probably don't call them that. We call them nothing. In your case, you're a talent strategy. When it comes to the product roadmap for talent, who should be responsible for that? Because a talent leader already has a ton on that person's plate, right? They got a billion things to manage, but we typically do ask them to have that roadmap focus as well. Is that something that should be a different position? Should that be already included in somebody's leadership role? Is that something? What are your thoughts on that?
I do think thinking about overall talent strategy and product or tooling or processes as a roadmap for the year is really hard to put on leaders that are also tasked with executing on hiring and overseeing those teams. It's a partnership. I don't think anybody should do it in a silo. But my team, for example, is responsible for partnering on what does our tools roadmap look like? What are the process improvements we're looking at? What are the strategic initiatives of the organization that we can partner in thinking about those processes or policies or tooling that's going to enable our team to be able to execute alongside? And so, again, I don't think that this can be done in a vacuum. I need to understand what the priorities of the business are, what are the priorities of those talent leaders that I'm partnering with. But then my team can be the one to go and execute on them because, again, we're not tasked with filling the seats in the same way. So I can really go do a bunch of vendor demos and understand how technology is shifting in the ecosystem and then bring those proposals to the table so that we can enable our team more properly.
Would it be difficult for your team to extend? And obviously that's very internally facing roadmap stuff, which I think is great because I think that a lot of that stuff gets missed across the board. Would it be very difficult for your team to go embed in other teams? Obviously not full-time. I don't know if it'd be a full-time job, but embed on a rotation basis to understand those needs better. And obviously, because in this question, the reason I'm asking is, as we were talking about getting into the room earlier, we did talk about, understanding that product roadmap, understanding where those features are going, understanding some of those technologies the engineering team might be even exploring just to have some context. Is that something that would be of value to the talent team? Would that be an extension that, let's say, your team could offer? Because obviously, I don't know if it's a full-time position for somebody, but that would take some time.
So when you say embedding yourself into other teams, do you mean in terms of like a project management capacity or a strategic capacity? And like, how can talent relate to building this engineering product, or how can talent relate to building these processes and policies with legal?
Yeah, actually, I may be more focused on how does talent get to be a fly on the wall earlier in those rooms to actually understand the 2-year, the 3-year roadmap? Because obviously, if you're an engineering org, you're probably going to end up needing certain skill sets we know. If there are roadmap features that are being developed that potentially are going to push us into an area we don't have, what happens is when we get to that juncture and we do the talent planning, then we have to go figure out all those nuances in a much more accelerated fashion. Whereas if you could actually plan that out as the product team does with the engineering team, I'm just trying to understand, is there an opportunity to shift far left into the business earlier so that we just have visibility into those things before they get to the headcount planning phase?
Absolutely. I think we at Carta have always really advocated to deeply embed ourselves within the business. So it's not uncommon for our talent partners, but especially our talent leaders, to attend the stand-ups for the various businesses that they support. Be that fly on the wall that's hearing that, okay, we're thinking we might spin this thing up because that's going to impact our own team's capacity. How are we going to be able to support it? And if we do pivot that direction, we're ready. And so we get to be a bit more proactive versus reactive in that planning. I think the point is, how do you get into that room earlier? Because the invite is not always forthcoming. And so I think part of that is really building your relationship in a way that's going to shift the mentality from recruiting being this order taker where, all right, well, I'm ready to hire, I'm going to go reach out to recruiting, to instead being this strategic partner that is going to help you build a better strategic product or roadmap or team. And I think that that's actually really interesting in the last couple of years. I think we've started talking a lot more about talent. Like recruiting used to be, I think, the way we would title most of our teams. And I've seen this change in the last 2 years that a lot of us have retitled to talent, which I think really speaks to that high quality talent teams aren't just recruiters. We aren't just order takers. We are strategic partners to your organization, thinking about the talent strategy that's going to help you execute on your goals. And so if you can position yourself as a strategic partner, thinking about what does this team need? What am I bringing to the table? I'm not just coming with candidates to serve a need that they've already defined for me, but instead telling them about what's happening in the market and hearing something from that all hands where I come back and reach out. Hey, it sounds like this might be on the roadmap. These are some things that we might want to think about if we want to build a talent strategy to execute upon that next year. That's going to build that relationship of trust because they see you as an expert and now you're a strategic partner.
That relationship of trust, as you are cultivating it, I guess some of the nature of recruiting is proactive. And obviously, as you mentioned, your team can go out, do the thing, build that trust, and be ready. I guess when you're in more of a reactive mode and the team does have to potentially focus on addressing a need, building trust quickly, how have you seen it work where you have to quickly accelerate some of those things?
I think there are times when you have to be reactive. Sometimes you're in hyper growth, you get thrown in, and you do need to just execute on the goals. Sometimes you need to hire people to serve the need. But even at that lowest level, I think there starts to be opportunities where you can be more proactive. And the proactive bringing of strategic insights is what will start to build that trust. And so it can even be in I'm an active recruiter, I'm filling positions, but I can see that my hiring process is taking too long. I have industry insights. I have data that tells me there is a holdup here at the hiring manager stage. And that's because the hiring manager has not given me clear expectations on what they need. Or at the take home stage, it's taking too long for people to execute. Or at the offer stage, we're seeing too many declines because maybe our compensation isn't in line with the market. If our business has to be the one that comes to us and says, hey, I think this is a problem, you're breaking down trust that you are the expert at what you're doing. Versus if you are in the seat and can identify, these are the things that are happening in my pipeline, here are some solutions that I want to propose, that's going to build quick trust, even when you're in more of a reactive hiring mentality. And then once you're building that trust more, you can layer up into actually being proactively involved in more of that org planning itself, and making sure that when you hear those things about potential attrition on the team, all right, has HR been looped in? We're thinking about adding all of this extra headcount. Okay, well, I know finance is going to care about this. You can be the glue between these different organizations with all those nuggets of information that you get, where even when you're reactive and you have to be executing, you can be proactive by being the person who has the information and shares it with the right people.
You're also focused on some of the technologies and roadmap that you just described, a little bit earlier about that. When you're looking to find a champion in the stakeholders to help promote some of these, changes, the adoption you're focused on, that's a slightly different relationship than us just trying to go out and help support a hiring cycle with a potential stakeholder. Do you have to do anything different when it comes to adoption of new things or new processes? Is that a similar trust we're relying on, or is that a whole different world we're changing and we need to handle it differently?
I actually think it's pretty similar. Okay. I think any relationship you're building, anytime you're involving stakeholders, it's about understanding who your audience is and what do they care about. Engineering tends to lean in more heavily on data. Do you actually have data to back up this need? Can you outline how this is going to make us more efficient? Finance tends to care more about the cost. Have you really thought about this? If you come to them proactively saying, I know this is important to you, here's how we've evaluated it, you're going to build more of that trust. And then the bare minimum on building trust with stakeholders is just being consistent and deliver on what you said you're going to and be over communicative. Because if you say you're going to do this thing and then you go dark, well, you've lost that trust. They don't actually believe that you're going to execute on what you said you would. They don't actually believe that you know how to execute on the plan that you proposed. It's kind of bare bones, but make sure that you're being consistent and that you're communicating and bringing people along.
I like that. I mean, obviously that communication portion is critical. When you are in situations where you are trying to help a team with a new tool set, obviously the internal team has to take time to ramp up. People need to adjust to those processes. That matrix team that you're kind of working with, can you maybe talk a little bit about that relationship? Because obviously your internal stakeholders are recruiters who are already stressed out and calls and meetings stack all day. How do you work with them to help them actually in that adoption phase?
Yeah, change management is probably the most important part of any new process or new tool rollout. And the CEO for Ashby, Benji, did a presentation on this at a RecOps conference recently and talked about how the real keys to change management, and I completely agree with this, are documentation. Make sure that you're very clear on what should happen, that it is embedded in the product where you can. If it's automated so that your recruiters don't actually have to change their workflow or their workflow is forced due to tooling, it's really easy to adopt. And just repeat yourself over and over and over. It takes, what do they say? It takes like 7 times for someone to hear it. But that change management part is super essential because, again, you can build the most perfect proposal. This tool is going to save us this much time. It's going to make us this much more efficient. And if nobody adopts it, well, you wasted that time and money. And there, again, you're going to break down trust in that you advocated for a tool, you advocated for this process that didn't work. Why are they going to trust you for the next proposal that you're going to make? So making sure that you are doing everything you can to really enable adoption is so important.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I like it. I do think change management is, a lot of times we get, these stats about projects failing, and I think change management doesn't get spoken about enough, which I think you did a great job articulating. When you're looking at the recruiting process in general, like the talent acquisition process in general, it does at times, you mentioned the partnership, the trust. I completely agree. There are times where, like any project, there are conflicts, there's friction. I mean, how can there not be? You said engineering, for instance, is very receptive to data. When it comes to their processes, is conflict resolution relying on that data? Is there other ways of conflict resolution? Because sometimes these hard to fill roles, these hard to fill requirements, they are not easy. They're tax on the talent team. And I think a lot of times it's hey, let's just go ahead and do it to get the data when they already know there's going to be an issue. But how do you see, or how do you approach situations when you know the team's pretty much going to fail if they continue what's being asked of them, but they kind of are in that bit of a sticky situation?
It really, different stakeholders are going to respond differently, but I don't think conflict and like speaking into your expertise is necessarily a bad thing. I think, again, if you can respectfully push back and bring valuable information to the table, I think that actually builds you as a leader and an expert in the room, which builds more trust for people wanting to loop you in sooner. You have insights they didn't think about versus being just like an order taker. Now, there are times where you're going to have people that insist that their unconventional way of doing this is going to work, even though we've got like the time tested data that says that it hasn't before. And all you can do is really continue to bring that data forward and be the expert in the room. Hey, this is all the data that I have around what the market looks like. You're looking for a unicorn. There's 3 people who live in this specific place with those 12 skills that you want. And all of them are employed. We reached out to all of them. None of them are interested in working for us right now. You want us to keep down this path? Okay, let's try it. Let's try it for a week. I'm going to source X amount of profiles. They are going to be 60% the right fit. And we're going to see how much response we get. And we're going to see if maybe it fits what you need, because I don't have anybody else that's 100% a fit. And we're going to partner with you to figure out what's going on. If we can maybe find the person who could be the right fit, if we didn't have all the nice to have skills, we must have skills. Sometimes it takes some massaging like that. But I think setting really clear expectations around, here's what I understand to be true about the market. Here's the data I have to back that up. And if you are insistent that we still need to run down this path, here's our trial period. Like, this is the time frame in which we are going to test this hypothesis. And what is our agreement if this doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very difficult situation, because somebody mentioned we are subject matter experts in talent. The hiring managers are subject matter experts in the domain that is being hired for. And there is a difference of viewpoint sometimes of whose opinion should carry a little bit more weight. And I think that's tricky, because obviously we're also, when we look at it, we don't have as much skin in the game when it comes to actually that hire, right? Yes, I understand there's a consequence of bad hires, good hires. I get it. But person's not joining our team. And I do understand that. I guess when you're kind of looking at the perspective of the actual talent team, looking at their resources, you mentioned a trial period. Is that the best to kind of optimize protecting their time? I mean, is that the best we can do? I mean, I don't know if we can say we're not going to work on the rec. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, I guess it is possible. I'm lying. It is possible, but that probably is not going to happen.
Yeah. I think it's also helpful to always pull it back to the business goals too. Like, all right, we are saying we need this specific person. All right, well, how soon do we need someone in here to do that role? And we can kind of back into, all right, well, this is how long it is likely going to take us to fill someone with these very specific skills. And if we are saying that this is the only way we're going to do it, okay, great. We are aligned that we may not fill this role for 6 months. We are aligned that we may not fill this role for a year. And if we are all on the same page that that business objective won't be impacted in a negative way, great. And then how can we also loop in the hiring team to support that process? If it is really time intensive from a TA perspective, and we know it's going to take a really long time, how can we maybe loop the team into doing some of those resume reviews for us, helping us find that specific talent that, like you're saying, your knowledge of this industry and this background is trumping my knowledge of how talent works. I'm not saying that that's not true. How can you help me? Can you help me do some sourcing? Can you help me do some outreach? How can we figure out how to share this load if this is really going to be such a specific search? And sometimes that gets our managers in the weeds of what it looks like to do outbound sourcing and screenings to understand our world a little bit more and can bring them along. Or sometimes it also puts them out there in the market and then candidates are more responsive. I love doing SOBO outreaches for that reason, where it's coming directly from the manager as opposed to the recruiter, because this is who you're actually going to be working with. I actually know the type of stuff that you work on. That's exciting for people. That could be the thing that tips it over and brings somebody to us. So I don't think either side has to be wrong, but it does mean you have to change your strategy and try something new.
I like that. That's actually some fantastic advice. Ashley, I want to say thank you for coming on. Thanks for kind of chatting with us and providing your views. I know we kind of covered a few different areas. I'm sure we raised more questions than answers. Is there a good way of connecting with you to ask any follow-ups or ask you, a question that maybe I missed on this?
Yeah, absolutely. You can feel free to find me on LinkedIn and request a connection, and I'm happy to chat with you there.
Okay. I'll make sure to include that. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. 1, I think we talked about talent's influence. We dove in pretty deep on a couple of different areas. We talked about the proactive and reactive nature. We also talked about some of that conflict and pushing back. How do you not? And also we talked about some adoption stuff that I thought I couldn't help but asking Ashley. So share this episode with somebody else that might find it useful. I think we had some great content in there. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.